My name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Chris and Beth Barnes at Chris James Cellars. It's August 30th, 2019. Thank you both for joining us today. We'll start with the most important question of all, which is why wine?
Well, I've been very interested in the wine industry since early 20s or so, my 20s. And I got interested in wine because I used to work for a company in Florida, and they would always take us out to these expensive dinners, and this same group of guys would go out and they would buy expensive bottles of wine, and I wasn't really interested in wine, didn't like wine at the time, and I would notice after a while they kept buying the same bottles of wine. And so as being kind of a contrarian myself, I would challenge them to try different things, and over time that became that I became the wine expert by forcing them to try different things, and then researching the wines, and I started to get more and more interested in it at that point. And so, after several years, I started to really dive in and research wines from all around the world. And then I moved away and went to college, and I started to learn about wine on a budget. and I've tried a huge range of different wines, and then I started buying books about planting a vineyard and what it's like to run a vineyard, and that was my primary interest for several years. Meanwhile, I graduated school. I had got a master's in engineering, and as well as a master's in business administration, and went off to work for several years, and at that point I started looking for properties, and so we found this wonderful property here in Carlton, and we put an offer in on the property, did a lot of research, probably about a month's worth of research remotely, and then came up here, got a backhoe and a water drilling rig, and drilled a well and dug some test pits, did the soil analysis, and so it was a really great site. Put an offer in on it, and several months later we had owned the property. This is this is still about 2011 at the time, and we cleared an initial planting area in 2012, and that was about 10 or so acres, and we planted 3 or 4 acres of that, and we've been expanding ever since.
So let's back up for a minute and talk about how you two met, and also, Beth, your thoughts about this whole wine venture.
So we met in Indianapolis, so he skipped over the places he was in all those parts, but when he went to college, he moved to Indianapolis. That's where we met. And on our first date, he said he wanted to retire on a vineyard. I had no concept of what that meant. I just pictured sitting on a pretty deck, drinking some lovely wine in some sunshine. And so then we didn't really talk about it again, but moved to Salt Lake City. That was the next place that we were. And it was in that time that he was starting to look at properties and found this one on the internet, of all things. And he talked to me about it and said he wanted to come and look. And I was like, oh, I don't know. But we came and looked anyway. And then, we ended up putting in the offer, doing the research on it, buying it. And it was very different than it is now when we were looking at it. And when we first saw it, it was an old timber farm. The parents had passed away and left it to their kids. The kids took the value out of it and then kind of let it go. There was an old single wide at the top of the hill that was falling in on itself, and it was a mess. But Chris got on the property and just saw great potential. I admit I maybe wasn't quite on board with that, but he convinced me we should at least try, and so we did, obviously. And yeah, every year expanding. So starting with the original 4 acres of Pinot, 3 acres of Pinot, 1 acre of Sauvignon Blanc, and then expanding to now have 17 acres. And we moved to the area in 2013, but we were in Beaverton. So that's the point at which he took over all vineyard management aspects. And then 2015, we built the house up on the hill. And so we've lived out here since.
So when you were looking for land, why was Oregon specifically on top of your mind, or was it just a happy coincidence that you found something in Carlton?
I was very interested in Oregon, and I can't really explain that. So there's a number of aspects. One of them is very pragmatic, which is that it was affordable. But the culture and the weather was appealing, especially after living in Utah, because it's such a different environment than prior to Utah. We had lived further east, where it rains, for example.
And it's green.
So
it's not a high desert.
So Oregon was very appealing, and frankly, Oregon has a very unique climate in the world. So that was also very interesting.
Our first trip up here was April of 2011. We came just for a getaway weekend. It was my birthday weekend, and we stayed at the Abbey Road bed and breakfast in the silos and toured around the Carlton area. And so I think that kind of helped because he kind of started looking in this area, as far as finding a place. Because I think all 3 places we looked at were kind of around this general area, nothing super far away in the Willamette Valley on the edges. So
When you started here, you mentioned potential, that you saw potential here where maybe you didn't see potential here. What about the land initially, maybe even before you did testing and dug in, what about it appealed to you in its raw form?
So some of it is kind of an emotional aspect, but a lot of it is technical. And so from the internet, if you are not on the ground, you look at soil maps and then aspects and try and find weather information and talking with people. But when you're here and it was full of brush and stumps and patches of blackberry bushes, etc., where it's hard to really see the land, and you're trying to look through it and look at the views and the aspects of the slopes, etc. So, I guess all of that combined, I was very inspired by it.
I have some great old photos. I made a photo book from when we bought the land to spring of 18. It's actually in there. And it follows the whole progression. And so I have some really early photos of when we first came onto the property of, him standing next to her on a stump and just very happy.
At what point did you start to see the potential?
Oh, I don't know, last week. It took a long time because the first couple of years you're just investing constantly. And so
and working.
Yeah. And so that first clearing of the hillside, you saw a dramatic change in the property and its potential there. But every year as we clear more and expand, it's more obvious. Of course, at this point, we know it's a nice property, but it becomes more beautiful. Whenever it's covered in brush and it's kind of a mess, you're kind of like, oh. If you had come 6 months ago, that hillside was entirely different because it was not cleared and groomed and ready to go. And so every piece of land that he expands it out to makes it, more beautiful.
What were some of the biggest challenges getting started? You mentioned a lot of work, a lot of investment. Were there things that were unforeseen about starting kind of from scratch?
The very first thing that comes to mind is the weeds. It's not very romantic, but it could cost a lot of money. And so And I think that, that's always going to be a challenge. Management of the vineyard is costly and time consuming. And it's not really an aspect that's talked about in the wine industry very much, but that's always a challenge.
And we do so much of it ourselves now instead of bringing in crews and people. And so I think that helps control some of it, but it is still, and you have to have the skills to actually do that stuff too, like the land clearing, the tools and the skills to actually do it.
Yeah.
So.
But we have a thistle infestation in this property
And
that
blackberry.
occupies. I'm constantly thinking about it, and I look at it and I see, okay, there's thistle over there.
A constant battle.
Yeah.
Tell me about the varietals you've chosen to plant here. Obviously, a little bit different than some of your neighbors. So, what did you start with, and kind of what have you expanded toward?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I'm kind of a contrarian a little bit. So, which I think is a hilarious joke. I say it's only half Pinot, but nobody else thinks it's funny. Yeah, we started out with about 2.5 acres or so of Pinot. We had a bunch of small plantings that were all spaced out so that we can bring it up to a full acre. But the small plantings included Lagrein, Dolcetto, Gewürztraminer, and Sauvignon Blanc initially. And the Pinot was Pommard, so it was all the same clone for the most part. We've since expanded to various different Pinot Noir clones. And kind of the justification is that we were looking to produce something that's different from everybody else. Lagrein was particularly interesting for me and continues to be because I have some family heritage from where Lagrein originates from in northern Italy. Mm-hmm. And it's also such a different variety from Pinot Noir in terms of the flavor profile and the, color and tannin structure, etc. So Dolcetto was interesting because it was a different red than Pinot Noir, and Gewürztraminer I love and I continue to love. It's such an underrated variety in my opinion. And Sauvignon Blanc is the same way, though I think it's appreciated more than Gewürztraminer. But since then we've planted Gamay Noir, 4 different clones of Chardonnay, more Pinot Noir clones, so I think we're up to about 5 different Pinot clones. A small planting of Riesling, which I think is underappreciated as well, and Choy Rebe, which is a cross of Riesling and Sylvaner, or thought to be a cross of Riesling and Sylvaner.
That's how you pronounce that. I was curious about that.
Yeah. We have another small planting of something called Huxel Rebe. It's from the same breeder in Germany, but it's somewhat different. Just 7 rows or so. It'll probably be blended in.
How has the reaction been as you've tried to sell some of these things that are not as familiar, harder to pronounce, people haven't tasted before? What have the reactions been of consumers?
Well, it's funny that you bring up the name. Like Gewürztraminer, I think, is underappreciated because of the people are afraid to even ask for it. It's not that they don't like it. In fact, they seem to universally enjoy the wine when they try it. So it's just getting them to try it.
They're also afraid it's going to be super sweet, but ours is in more of an off-dry style. And so sometimes you have to coax them into even trying it, but then when you do, they enjoy it.
Yeah. So in any case, reaction is usually very positive. A number of our club members enjoy that style of wine. And so they come to expect that from us. But what we do is, I think the way to handle that, which we're moving towards, is not calling it Gewürztraminer, calling it something else. So we have a white blend that we call Cuvée Blanc. Last year that was 100% Muller Thurgau actually, but we'll be, that will be continuing to evolve that every year. So
Oregon white wine.
And we've done really well with
Yeah.
that one. Our 17 won lots of awards in the local, like SIP. It was the best of show for whites. We have definitely gained a reputation as having really great whites. And now as we're kind of starting to release more reds that are not Pinot, people are coming and really enjoying those ones as well.
You mentioned first date, talking about retiring on a vineyard. So it sounds to me like the vineyard aspect was your initial draw. At what point did you decide winemaking also and professional winemaking no less?
yeah, so that was through the Chemeketa program. So we went, I went and did all the viticulture courses there, and towards the end of that 1 year track, I was approached to attend the wine science class at Chemeketa, and that was kind of what bridged the gap for me. And that was a very technical class that I really enjoyed, and that was taught by Jesse Sandrock, who said, if you'd like, you can make the wine from the section of the vineyard that you've farmed here. So that was really appealing, and so then the next semester I went into the wine production series, and after going through that, it was shortly after that I was drawing up plans for building a winery. So
We have a friend that was doing some work for us on the vineyard around that time. And it was, winter, maybe pruning. And she was talking to Chris, and Chris was like, I think I'm going to build a winery. And then she came back like 6 months later, and it was, half done or whatever. And so, yeah, it was, we built the winery, he built the winery in summer of, 2016.
Yep.
And so started kind of early in the summer and finished just in time for harvest. And then the inside, the tasting room part, we left unfinished until winter of 17 to 18. So the tasting room only officially opened in April of 2018.
Wow.
So just a year ago.
Wow. Tell me about the winemaking process and learning it, and what appealed to you about it specifically.
So a friend of mine made a comment to me that you only have so many vintages in your life. And so my approach to winemaking has been to try as many things as I can at once. And in my
31.
and in my engineering life, I am very interested in parallel processing. So doing all these things, you should see me make breakfast. I make breakfast in 10 minutes. Anyways, doing everything at once. So I do a lot of experimentation. I think I've learned pretty quickly. I try and do things that other people are not doing. So, for example, with Pinot Noir, I am interested in trying to get more extraction than having a leaner style of Pinot. I am interested in trying to get as much aromatics in our white wines as we can. So I think probably what defines my approach to winemaking the most is experimentation and trying something different.
Was there anything about winemaking as you started learning it and now have done it? Is there anything that surprised you about it? Any part of the process that you were unprepared for?
Well, the first thing that springs to mind, I think, is there's some aspect where you don't have control. And I think through farming and winemaking, probably combined, I've realized that I'm not going to have control over everything, and to be uncomfortable with uncertainty at some level.
So you found the property in 2011, and you started kind of working on it in 2012, and now here you are, the vineyard and the tasting room and the winery. It's a pretty fast process to kind of go all in on wine. So tell me about that process of sort of devoting yourself to this, and what's the positives and negatives along the way. If anything comes to mind.
I can tell you, we kept, at least me, throughout the whole process, I felt like we were at the hardest part, and it wasn't until we got to actually selling wine that now I'm pretty sure that's really the hardest part.
There's no more parts.
Perfect. And so, because at that point, you're convincing someone else that your product is worth their hard-earned money. Everything else was just us pouring money into it. And so at that point, you have to take into account that everybody's palate is different. Not everybody's going to like everything. But to me, and maybe it's because that's the part I'm more responsible for, it's the hardest part.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Thanks. I'm glad that's on tape.
So tell me what kind of, with that challenge, and now acknowledging the challenge of selling wine, tell me about how you are going about selling wine.
Well, we started so our first bottled wine was our Sauvignon Blanc from 2015. So 15 was our first vintage. We made Pinot Noir and we made Sauvignon Blanc. Of course, the Sauvignon Blanc came out first. We started right away doing events, and our first one ever was Savor Cannon Beach in March of 2016. And we showed up there and we had a single wine to present to people. And of course, we were excited. I was excited because we were finally selling something. And we only had like less than 25 cases of that wine total. And so, I know, it seems so small now. And so we started right away with the events, and we hit as many events as we could. So we started trying to get into the bigger ones, but they're hard. You have to kind of serve your time before you can get into the bigger ones like Newport and Astoria. So we did smaller ones. We would show up as a guest winery at different places in Carlton, things like that. And we did that approach for, all the way, I guess, until the tasting room opened. But we were doing progressively bigger and bigger shows with competitions. Our wines always showed really well. I think we've had 5 different Best of Show winners at this point. Lots and lots of gold medals and all that good stuff, which helps bring the customers over. And then, of course, throughout that time, building on our mailing list, starting our club. Of course, having the tasting room has really helped with the club.
The tasting room was really the game changer, I think, for us.
And when we were even debating about that, we considered our options. Do we want to do a storefront in town, either Carlton or McMinnville, or do we want to build it out here? We ultimately decided to build it out here, because we had some space for it, and because people love the vineyard experience. So we're a little off the beaten path. I know that. People are getting closer to us, though, as more, residents opened. There's another property to the northwest that's getting the AVA extended out so they can potentially plant. So it's coming our way. But for now, we're kind of the furthest west one. People still come, though. We've done a lot this summer to get people out here. Things like the winery hunt passport, events practically every weekend of some sort. Basically whatever I can think of to lure people out here. And it's worked. People come.
Let's talk about those events. Obviously, you mentioned stargazing coming up next week. What else have you been working on, and sort of what are the goals? Obviously, you mentioned people recognizing you, but what are the other goals besides that when you have these kind of events? So
we do some events that are fundraisers, and then we do some events that are more marketing to get people out here. We've done several paint parties this summer. In fact, we work with a company called Bottle and Bottega out of Portland, and they took 3 photographs that I took on the property and turned them into the paintings. So that's what the students make. We've done that a few times. We did a Birds of Prey event, which was a fundraiser for an organization that rehabs these birds of prey and re-releases them. And so that was an educational thing where they brought out 7 birds of prey, so hawks, owls, falcons, and the educators actually carried them around on their arm and talked to people and answered questions, and we did food and wine. We're doing the stargazing night next week, so this is our second time doing that, and it's again a fundraiser. They're building an observatory in Carlton, and
Really?
so they do these road
Awesome.
shows, the organization that's going to be building it, and they bring out 3 high-powered telescopes. We put them up in the vineyard, do a lovely food and wine pairing. A professor from Pacific University comes and does a 20-minute kind of lecture, and then we go and we look through the telescopes. And so it's a great way to get them a little bit of exposure and some money, and to make our guests and club members really have a lovely time. And then the new one we're doing coming up here in a couple of weeks is our first on-site winemakers dinner. We've done several with different restaurants and locations in the area. And so this will be our first one here, which we're pretty excited to try and see how it goes. Yeah, but we're doing it the 14th of September, so I'm just hoping harvest holds out because we plan to do it in the winery. So I need that space.
I guess that makes the pick date a lot easier to choose then, I guess.
Right, yeah. Well, the 15th of September is fine. Yeah. Well, it'll work. It'll all work out. Worst case, we can have it out here if we have to.
So a few weeks ago, we did an interview with Elena Rodriguez down at Alumbra, and she mentioned your mentorship. So even though you're fairly new to the industry, you're already working with other new people, newer comers to the industry. So tell me about that role as a mentor in the industry, and why you've chosen that.
Well, I didn't choose it.
But he willingly.
So, no, I enjoy talking about winemaking and vineyard work, and I enjoy Elena. So she is very interested in it, and I enjoy talking to people that are interested in talking about the things that I like to talk about. Yeah, and she's a smart person, and so she likes to hear about my thoughts about winemaking. So, yeah, I think it's a good partnership.
And I'm giving her what knowledge I have about how to go about selling wine. And so I'm trying to get her to come up here and be a guest winery and do that whole thing, because it's hard to get started. So,
What would you consider your major successes so far? I know you're still fairly new to this, but what are the biggest successes? What are the things you look back on most happily?
17 acres and vines in the ground.
I don't know. That's a tough one, because I'm very self-critical. So I happiness is a powerful word for me. So I have, my expectation is that it's starting a winery is a 10 to 15 year process before it becomes successful, or what I would view as successful. I'm always chasing, I always have some idea of what it is to be successful, and when I arrive at that point in my life, I don't think that I'm a success, and I have some other idea of what success is. Okay, so I have a lot of pressure on myself, and I'm always pushing forward. So I do have some satisfaction this year with how things have been going. So I'm really happy with our wine club and how things are working with the tasting room. So, I guess there's some glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, but I guess I'm always pushing. So that's why I hesitate when I hear the word happiness. If happiness to me means resting and relaxing. And so I never do that. So I'm never happy.
That was another project.
It's a painful life.
It was just a couple weeks ago. He was like, I'm out of projects. I think I'll start clearing a new area. And so then he started on the other area where you saw the excavator when you drove up the road. Me, I feel really good when, we go to a show and we get a great award. Like, sweet.
It's a good compliment to each other.
I had explained my views on life to another individual, and their reaction was something like, well, I guess that probably makes a good winemaker.
Never complacent, I guess.
Well, around here, there's always something to do.
I don't know if anybody else has that opinion or not, but that's just how I'm wired, so I'll suffer so that everybody else has nice wine.
Put that on the label. I suffered for your wine.
That's right. So you've expanded a little bit every year. Where do you see next? What do you see as you look into the future? You said 10 to 15 years for a successful winery. Where do you need to go to get to that point?
Well, so the expansion that we've done to the vineyard, to bring us up to 17 acres or so, allows for us to sell some fruit as well as make all of the varieties that I had wanted at least a year or two ago. But that continues to evolve, and we also learn more about what sells and what doesn't, and of course that is always changing. So I already have some ideas for varieties that we could plant in our future growth areas, and we have probably realistically something on the order of 7 to 9 acres more that we could plant on this property before it's all of the reasonably viable space is used up. So that's plenty to manage, and would be probably enough for the lifetime of the company. So, and more.
And we had talked about trying to do all estate wines. Right now we buy grapes. All estate wines except maybe big reds. So to get to that point, we have to plant whatever else he's thinking in his head he wants to grow.
Yeah, so I've been interested in Albarino. Zweigelt is Washington State has spent a good amount of time, and that seems to be growing in popularity. Good amount of time in that variety. It's definitely a cooler weather variety, which seems like not something you'd want to do right now, but that was very interesting. Tempranillo, which is a warmer variety, would be a good one to try out.
So we've progressed from about 200 cases in 2015, our first year, and then about 1,000 cases in 2016 because he bought a lot of fruit, and then we've been around 3,000 kind of since then.
Do you have a goal in mind for cases?
3,000 some?
The goal is the amount you can sell.
Once we get 3,000 club members, we'll up our case count.
Yeah. No, I think we'll be seeking that value, and of course that changes continuously. So 3,000 was probably a little bit high for early on, but we're not doing too bad as far as the amount we're selling. So I think everything will settle down here in the next few years. And we might stay around 3 years. That might be the perfect number.
So tell me a little bit about Carlton as an AVA or as an area here. It's obviously grown quite a bit very quickly, and you guys are part of that. So tell me about it's the perception of Carlton and kind of what you've seen from it and what you're seeing for its future.
Yeah, I guess I'm less confident talking about the future of the AVA because I don't feel like I'm an authority on that. But I love the AVA, and I'm happy to be part of it. It's a great organization, and I know that it's the envy of a number of other AVAs in the area. So I'm really happy to be a part of it.
And even outside of the AVA and the grape growing aspect, the community is fantastic. So our son goes to school in Carlton. We participate in the fundraisers. So they do a couple times a year to support the organization. In fact, the Carlton Crush is coming up next weekend too. It's a big festival. There's actually grape stomping still involved, which is fun. And so it's a really good community in addition to being a great AVA.
So the property is right on the edge of the AVA, and I generally don't talk about much, but the AVA is known for having more sedimentary soils, and this is a pocket in the coastal range which has more volcanic soils, which is more similar to Dundee Hills actually, and there's a few other vineyards in the AVA that have that. So this is a little bit unique, and with regard to soil and the profile versus the rest of Yamhill Carlton. But
Interesting.
yeah.
So does that, being closer to the coastal range, does that also make this a cooler site than others in the AVA?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't have another site over there.
I think that I would say that it's probably cooler at night, but during the day, you would think that maybe it's the same, or in other words, a degree or two cooler during the day. I've never had any trouble ripening anything here, though. So,
But we've had pretty warm summers the last
Yeah.
few, so this year will be interesting.
when we planted the site, we had gotten a lot of feedback from that this would probably be a cooler area. I haven't noticed that it being exceptionally cooler than any other site, though. So, during the winter time, though, it'll be cooler here than elsewhere, which is more obvious with snow.
Yeah,
So,
when we get the snow.
yeah.
So I want to broaden out just a little bit and talk about the Oregon industry more in general. I know you're fairly new to it, but whatever your perspective is would be helpful. I'm just curious, in your eyes, what the current state of the Oregon wine industry is. What is Oregon wine right now in 2019?
Yeah, that's a challenging question because I've been so focused on starting up of our own brand. Though when I go to the Oregon Wine Symposium, I do get this broader perspective, and I appreciate when we go to other states and do sales that I am talking more about the broader Oregon story and the Yamhill Carlton AVA story. And there's a lot of education that we have to give to people just to explain Oregon to them. And when people are aware of Oregon, it's very helpful because, I don't have to give that, they already have some perceived value in their mind of Oregon. So that's definitely helpful for us. And I guess, Oregon has the perception of having a high quality product and a higher perceived value. So,
But from your perspective on the sales end, is that what you were kind of running into as well?
Yeah, we've done a couple of events with our distributor in Pennsylvania where the people may or may not already know about Oregon wines, but the ones that know about it definitely think Oregon is a great place to get them.
And what about for Oregon's future? What are you seeing as you look ahead? I know obviously you're focused on yourselves, I understand that,
Yeah.
but as you look ahead on Oregon's wine future in the next, say, 10 years, what do you see? Or what do you hope for?
Growth.
what I hope for, I think, is a little bit of more of what I see now. There's a lot of excellent wines from not just from all of the producers in the area. The quality of the wine is very good, and seeing more wines that are not Pinot Noir. Not that there's any. I love Pinot Noir, but I love that a lot of people are experimenting with different wines and different winemaking techniques. There are some really interesting wines out there, and so I guess that's what I would hope for is more of that.
Yeah, and for better or worse, it seems like the consolidation is currently happening and probably will continue to happen where, the bigger California or other ones buy up some of the, the older marquee ones in the area, which to me is kind of sad, but I totally get it too. So that I would expect would continue to happen more.
You said your first response was growth. Is that so? Are you anticipating more growth?
Yeah, I would think so. It seems like, from what I know of, the recent history, it's been growing, and so I would expect it to continue to grow, especially as organizations, the Willamette Valley Winery Association, the Carlton AVA, they're all getting out there and trying to help a lot with the marketing piece. So we're pretty small. We don't have a giant marketing budget to promote ourselves, around the country. But those wineries that are bigger and do have the pockets to do that, still build a brand for the area. And so it's good to have them getting out and doing that. And then where we do events with the associations helps us.
What about challenges or obstacles or concerns as you look ahead for Oregon wine or for Yamhill Carlton specifically, however you're seeing? Are there things on the horizon that you're concerned about?
I think probably a continuous concern is as the climate warms here, that there's going to be more diseases and more pests. So that's basically the problems from places south of here will come up here.
And I was thinking of it more from a financial perspective of if, there's a recession or anything like that, then it's going to impact wine sales. So I'm worried about the sales.
That's not a problem for Oregon. So
well, but it is. If there's a recession overall, then it's going to impact.
It very clearly shows where you guys' heads are in this particular industry. I like that.
Worried about the farming. I'm worried about sales.
What words of wisdom would you have for someone who was interested in joining the Oregon wine industry today?
I'd want to sit down and talk to them for 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, what's motivating them?
No, I think it's a big commitment.
Yeah.
It's probably a lifetime commitment in terms of the amount of work, the dedication, and as we've mentioned about 15 times so far, the financial aspect of it. So.
And we have talked to some people who are obviously like Elena and some other people who are just kind of dipping their toe in and getting started. And that is the kind of stuff we bring up, is that it is a lot of hard work, and it takes time and effort to get a brand established. Yeah. If you even want to do the winemaking piece, maybe you do just want to do the farming. Yeah.
Elena has been working her vineyard for a number of years.
She's slightly different.
That's,
No, I'm thinking of the 4031. What are their names? I can't remember their names right now. But they just did their first event. Forest Grove Uncorked was their first one. And we talked to them, probably, 6 months ago or so, more than that even, about, getting started with events and things like that. So, and we have people up here all the time that are like, oh, I so want to do this. I was like, okay.
Yeah, that part of it's fun. That sitting around drinking wine and meeting people part is fun.
Well, they see the vineyard and they're like, I want to plant a vineyard. It's like, okay. So you just talk with them about it.
in lieu of all of the challenges and all of the kind of words of warning you would have going in, what are the rewards and benefits in your perspective to doing this, to that lifetime of commitment?
I think probably the first things that spring to my mind is that building a successful company, of course, has its own value, and with regard to giving something to our son, if he's interested in that. Meeting people who enjoy the wines, and we have a club that's growing, and it's great to have those people come back and enjoy the property and enjoy coming out here and having a good time.
Bring their friends out and spreading the word even more.
Yeah.
The wines are great, right? So making people happy with great wine.
I also like experimenting with the wine, so that's
Its own reward.
That's its own reward. Is like trying all these different approaches and finding something, and what comes out of that is some style that it's an evolution, and being able to actually put your finger on what's my style. And that has come out in the last few years. So anyways, that's a feeling of satisfaction for me.
Do you have a way to describe it? If you had to say what your style is,
Yeah, so at the moment, it is aromatic whites, and I'm looking for bigger reds, including with Pinot. So something with more body and very aromatic and silky texture. So that's what we do in the winery is essentially trying to accentuate those aspects of the wine.
Okay, last question I have for you. Speaking of big commitments, what's the secret to a happy and successful marriage in the Oregon wine industry?
Division of labor.
Tolerance.
Letting him go outside and land clear for long periods of time. We have a pretty good balance of who does what in the different pieces, and for the most part I let him just go crazy in the winery, and I just request a couple little things. And then I mostly handle, the tasting room and the marketing and all that stuff. So we really kind of have specific things that we handle. What she said.
I already answered the question.
Like it.
Come back and ask us again in 10 years.
So that's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything I should have asked that I didn't? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered? Kind of last thoughts for the camera here?
No.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
We really appreciate this. And then we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Thanks.